Emma Johnson had always been careful. As a black nurse in Boston's most prestigious hospital, she knew that excellence wasn't just expected, it was required for survival. The single mother of two had built a reputation for precision and care, rising through the ranks to become head nurse of the cardiac unit, despite the whispers that followed her success. Emma's day had started like any other. She woke at 5:00 a.m., prepared breakfast for her children, 16-year-old Lily and 10-year-old Daniel, and helped them get ready for school. Their small apartment was neat and organized, just like Emma herself. Family photos lined the walls, showcasing moments of joy, despite the struggles they had faced since Emma's husband died 5 years ago. "Mom, can I stay at Jessica's house this weekend?" Lily asked, grabbing her backpack. "We'll talk about it tonight," Emma replied, checking her watch. "I might need to pick up an extra shift." Daniel hugged her tightly before rushing out the door. "Love you, Mom." Those words echoed in Emma's mind as she arrived at Boston Memorial Hospital, the imposing brick building where she had worked for the past 12 years. The morning passed in a blur of patient rounds, medication checks, and staff meetings. Emma was respected by doctors and loved by patients. Her hands were steady, her mind sharp, and her smile genuine despite the exhaustion that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her. At lunch, Emma sat with her friend and colleague, Nancy Parker, another nurse who had started at the hospital around the same time as Emma. "You look tired," Nancy commented, pushing her salad around her plate. Emma sighed. "Daniel has a science project due, and Lily needs new shoes for track. The usual." "You should take a vacation," Nancy suggested. "When was the last time you took a day off?" Emma laughed. "What's a vacation?" Neither woman noticed Thomas Wilson watching them from across the cafeteria. The detective had been observing Emma for days, waiting for the perfect moment. He wasn't alone in his surveillance. Hospital Administrator William Parker had provided him with access to the building, security codes, and staff schedules. Parker wanted Emma gone, and Wilson was happy to help for the right price. After lunch, Emma returned to the cardiac unit. The afternoon passed with the usual rhythm of a busy hospital. She checked medication charts, spoke with doctors about treatment plans, and comforted a patient who had just received difficult news. The rain started around 3:00 p.m., pattering against the windows as dark clouds gathered overhead. Emma was thinking about Daniel's upcoming basketball game when two officers appeared at the nurse's station. Detective Thomas Wilson stood tall and imposing in his dark suit, while Officer Robert Hayes lingered slightly behind, hand resting on his holster. The sudden silence on the floor was deafening as all eyes turned to watch. "Emma Johnson." Wilson's voice was cold and official. The small smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. Emma looked up from her charts, confused. "Yes? Can I help you?" "We need you to come with us," Wilson stated, reaching for his handcuffs. Emma's heart began to race. "What's this about?" "I'm in the middle of my shift." Hayes stepped forward. "We have evidence that you've been stealing medications from the hospital pharmacy and selling them." The accusation hit Emma like a physical blow. She looked around at her colleagues, seeing shock and uncertainty on their faces. Nancy stepped forward. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Wilson said firmly. "Please turn around, Ms. Johnson." Emma's legs felt weak. "I need to call someone to pick up my children from school." "You can make one call at the station," Wilson replied, already turning her around and securing the handcuffs around her wrists. The metal was cold against her skin, the clicks of the lock sounding impossibly loud in the quiet hospital corridor. Emma felt a wave of humiliation as Wilson and Hayes led her through the hospital. Patients stared. Doctors stopped mid-conversation. A young nurse gasped and covered her mouth. Dr. James Miller, the chief of cardiology, and Emma's direct supervisor, stepped into their path. "What's going on here?" "Emma is one of our most trusted nurses." "We have evidence, Doctor," Hayes said firmly. "Please step aside." Emma caught Dr. Miller's eye. Please call Patricia. Tell her she needs to get the kids. The walk through the hospital felt endless. Emma kept her head high despite the shame burning in her chest. The rain had intensified, matching her darkening mood as they approached the hospital exit. Through the glass doors, Emma could see reporters with cameras already waiting. Somehow, they had been tipped off. How did they know? Emma whispered, horrified. Wilson didn't answer, but the slight smile returned to his face as he pushed open the door. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, reporters shouting questions all at once. Is it true you stole from cancer patients, Nurse Johnson? How long have you been selling hospital drugs? Did your colleagues know about your criminal activities? Emma kept her eyes forward as they guided her to the waiting police car. The rain soaked through her scrubs, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was Lily and Daniel seeing these images on the news. At the police station, they placed her in a small interrogation room with gray walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. Emma sat alone for nearly 2 hours, her nurse's watch marking each passing minute, before Wilson and Hayes finally returned. You understand the seriousness of these charges? Wilson asked, placing a folder on the table between them. Emma leaned forward, her voice steady despite her fear. I've never stolen anything in my life. Not a pen, not a paperclip, and certainly not medications. Check the records. Check the cameras. Wilson smiled, opening the folder to reveal photographs of Emma entering the medication room after hours, along with logs showing discrepancies in the narcotics inventoried on dates when she had been working. We did, he said, his voice almost gentle now, which somehow made it worse. And you know what we found. Emma stared at the evidence before her, mind racing to understand how this could possibly exist. The dates, the times, the signatures. They looked real. But she knew they couldn't be. Someone had gone to great lengths to set her up. But who? And why? As the reality of her situation sank in, Emma thought of her children waiting at home, wondering where their mother was. She thought of her patients who depended on her. She thought of the career she had built with 12 years of hard work and sacrifice, all of it now hanging by a thread because of lies she couldn't yet understand. Emma spent her first night in jail staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. The thin mattress did little to cushion her body from the metal frame beneath. Every few minutes, she would close her eyes and try to sleep, only to snap them open again as her mind replayed the events that had led her here. The evidence against her seemed solid, too solid. Someone had planned this carefully, leaving no obvious holes in their story. When morning came, Emma's eyes were red and swollen from crying and lack of sleep. Johnson, you have a visitor, a guard called out. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit waited in the visiting area. He introduced himself as Michael Ramsey, her court-appointed attorney. His tired eyes and the coffee stains on his tie suggested he was overworked and underpaid. Ms. Johnson, I've been assigned to your case, he said, opening a folder. The charges against you are serious. Theft of controlled substances, intent to distribute, abuse of position. He looked up. This is your first offense, correct? I haven't committed any offense, Emma said firmly. Someone is setting me up. Ramsey sighed. He had heard this before from countless clients. The evidence is substantial. It's fake, Emma insisted. The security footage only shows me going into the medication room because I was called there for an emergency. There should be a record of that call. I'll look into it, Ramsey promised, though his tone lacked conviction. Your arraignment is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The courthouse was packed the next day. Emma, dressed in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, was led to a small table where Ramsey waited. Across the aisle sat District Attorney James Bennett, a tall man with perfectly combed gray hair and an expensive suit. The confidence in his posture told Emma everything she needed to know. He believed this case was already won. Judge Martha Wilson called the court to order. Case number 2546, State versus Emma Johnson. Bennett rose smoothly. Your Honor, Ms. Johnson used her position as head nurse to steal opioids from vulnerable patients, selling them for personal profit. We have security footage showing the defendant accessing the medication room after hours on multiple occasions. Officer Hayes discovered pills in her locker during a routine security check. Additionally, medication logs signed with her credentials showed discrepancies in the narcotics inventory. Emma whispered urgently to Ramsey, "Ask about the emergency call that night. Ask about the patient form I filled out." Ramsey nodded, but when he stood to address the court, his argument seemed weak compared to Bennett's polished presentation. "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. She claims there was an emergency call that required her to access the medication room." Bennett smiled slightly. "We've checked all records. No such emergency call exists." Emma felt a cold chill. Someone had erased the records. Furthermore, Bennett continued, "We have testimony from hospital staff who witnessed unusual behavior from the defendant in recent months." That was a lie. Emma wanted to scream, but Ramsey placed a calming hand on her arm. When the judge asked about bail, Bennett requested an amount that made Emma's heart sink. "The state requests bail be set at $250,000. Your Honor, Ms. Johnson presents a flight risk due to the serious nature of the charges." "Your Honor," Ramsey argued, "Ms. Johnson is a single mother with 2 children. She has deep roots in the community and no prior record." Judge Wilson considered for a moment. "Bail is set at $250,000. The gavel's bang echoed in Emma's ears. The sum might as well have been $1 million. There was no way she could pay it. Back in her cell, Emma tried to piece together who might be behind this. She had no enemies that she knew of. Her work record was spotless. The only recent change had been William Parker's appointment as hospital administrator 6 months ago. He had never seemed to like her, questioning her qualifications despite her years of experience. 3 days after her arraignment, Emma received her first visitors. Seeing Lily and Daniel enter the visiting area broke something inside her. They looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Lily, tall for 16 with her mother's determined chin, tried to appear strong. Daniel, only 10, made no such attempt. His eyes welled with tears as soon as he saw his mother in her prison uniform. "Mom." Daniel rushed forward, stopped short by the visiting room rules that prohibited physical contact. "It's okay, baby," Emma said, forcing a smile. "I'm okay." Patricia, Emma's sister, looked exhausted. With her own 3 children and now Emma's 2, she was stretched thin. "The neighbors are talking," Patricia said quietly. "The news showed your arrest. They made it look like you were caught red-handed." "It's all lies," Emma replied. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to make this look real." Lily leaned forward, her voice fierce despite her trembling lip. "Mom, we know you didn't do this. You've never even taken an aspirin without reading the label 3 times. Daniel nodded in agreement, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Miss Peterson at school asked if we were okay. She gave me extra pudding at lunch." Emma fought back tears. Her children were suffering because of this. "How are you managing, Patricia?" Emma asked. Patricia shrugged. "We're making it work. I picked up an extra shift at the diner. Your neighbor, Mrs. Thomas, is watching the kids when I'm at work. I've been helping with Daniel's homework," Lily added, "and I'm walking him to school." The pride in her daughter's voice nearly broke Emma. Lily shouldn't have to take on adult responsibilities. She should be focusing on school, friends, normal teenage things. "Have they found who really did it?" Daniel asked, hope bright in his eyes. "Not yet," Emma said, "but my lawyer is working on it." The truth was, Emma wasn't sure Ramsey was doing much at all. During their brief meetings, he seemed more interested in discussing plea deals than finding evidence to prove her innocence. "The truth will come out," Emma promised, though doubt had begun to creep into her voice. After her family left, Emma returned to her cell and sat on the edge of her bed. For the first time since her arrest, She allowed herself to consider the possibility that she might not win this fight. The thought of years in prison, of missing her children's growth, of losing everything she had worked for, was overwhelming. Her cellmate, a woman named Tanya serving time for check fraud, noticed her distress. "First visit's always the hardest," Tanya said. "But listen, if you really didn't do what they say, you gotta fight. The system chews up people like us and spits us out, especially if you're black." Emma nodded, wiping away a tear. "I know, but the evidence looks so real." "Then somebody went to a lot of trouble," Tanya replied. "And people don't do that unless they got something big to gain." Emma considered this. What could anyone gain from destroying her life? The question kept her awake long into the night as she stared at the ceiling and tried to hold on to hope that somewhere, somehow, the truth would find its way to light. Life fell apart faster than Emma could have imagined. 2 weeks after her arrest, she received a letter from Boston Memorial Hospital. The official hospital letterhead and formal language couldn't hide the harsh reality. Emma Johnson was suspended without pay, effective immediately. The letter explained that the suspension would remain in place until the legal matters were resolved, a polite way of saying until she was proven innocent or guilty. The next blow came from the state nursing board. Her nursing license, which she had worked so hard to earn and maintain, was now under review. Without it, even if she somehow managed to clear her name, finding work would be nearly impossible. "They're taking everything from me," Emma whispered to herself in the quiet of her cell. Her voice echoed off the concrete walls, making her feel even more alone. Patricia visited 3 times a week, bringing updates about the children and the outside world. The news was never good. People they had known for years, neighbors who had shared meals at their table, now treated the Johnson family like they carried a disease. "Mrs. Cooper from down the hall wouldn't even look at me in the elevator," Patricia said during one visit. "And the Jenkins family, who you watched their kids for free when their mother was sick. They crossed the street when they saw me coming." Emma stared at her hands, noticing how the skin had become dry and cracked from the harsh soap in the jail. "And the kids, how are they holding up?" Patricia sighed. "Daniel's teacher called. His grades are slipping. He got into a fight when another boy said his mother was a drug dealer." She hesitated before continuing. "And Lily, someone spray-painted drug dealer's kid on her locker at school." Emma closed her eyes, trying to control the wave of anger and helplessness that washed over her. "This is what they wanted," she said quietly. "To destroy not just me, but everything around me." The local news had taken the prosecutor's version of events and run with it. Emma watched in horror from the small television in the common area as Channel 5 ran a special investigation into her case. Emma Johnson, a trusted nurse at Boston Memorial, allegedly used her position to steal medications from the very patients she was supposed to care for, the reporter said solemnly into the camera. Sources close to the investigation suggest this may be part of a larger pattern of healthcare professionals abusing their positions of trust. The other inmates watched with her, some offering words of support, others keeping their distance, as if her alleged crimes might somehow rub off on them. In the quiet of her cell at night, Emma replayed every detail of the days before her arrest. Certain things weren't adding up. She remembered seeing Detective Wilson in the hospital cafeteria 3 days before any medications were reported missing. Why had he been there? And how had her computer login been used to access the medication system during hours when she was home with her children? During her next meeting with Michael Ramsey, Emma shared her concerns. To her surprise, her lawyer seemed more interested than usual. "The prosecution shared their evidence list with me yesterday," Ramsey said, adjusting his glasses. "They have login records showing you accessed the system at 2 a.m. on several occasions." "That's impossible," Emma insisted. "I wasn't even at the hospital. I was home with my kids." Ramsey made a note. "Can anyone confirm that?" "My children, my sister when she stayed over, and checked my cell phone location data. It would show I was at home, not at the hospital." For the first time since taking her case, Ramsey looked truly engaged. That's good. That's something we can use. Patricia's news during her next visit made Emma's blood run cold. Someone's been in your apartment, Patricia said, her voice low even though no one was close enough to hear. I went to get more clothes for the kids, and things were moved around. Drawers left open. Your desk had been gone through. Did you call the police? Emma asked. Patricia gave her a look. The police. Emma, they're the ones who put you here. Besides, there was no sign of forced entry. I thought maybe they had a warrant I didn't know about. They would have told me if they had a warrant, Emma said. Well, they took your computer, and I found something else. Patricia leaned closer. There was this strange small black device stuck behind your television. It had a little green light on it. Emma's eyes widened as realization hit her. They were listening to me. In my own home. I left it there, Patricia said. I thought it might be better if they didn't know we found it. When Ramsey visited the next day, Emma told him about the device. His reaction surprised her. This changes things, he said, suddenly looking more like a real lawyer and less like someone going through the motions. Illegal surveillance, unauthorized search and seizure. Emma, I think you're right. This isn't a simple case of theft. I've been saying that from the beginning, Emma replied, trying to keep the frustration from her voice. Ramsey opened his briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. I've been doing some digging. Officer Hayes, who claims he found pills in your locker. He doesn't just work for the Boston PD. He also works security for a company called Safeguard Solutions on his days off. I don't know what that has to do with anything, Emma said. Safeguard was hired by Boston Memorial 3 months ago to upgrade their security systems. Guess who brought them in? William Parker, Emma whispered. Ramsey nodded. The new hospital administrator. The same man who, according to your colleague Nancy Parker, no relation, by the way, has questioned your qualifications multiple times despite your excellent record. Something clicked in Emma's mind. Parker was hired 6 months ago. Before that, he worked for, I can't remember the name, but it was a healthcare company that ran several facilities. Meridian Healthcare Group, Ramsey supplied. They operate prison healthcare facilities, nursing homes, and rehabilitation centers across 3 states. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The first time we met, Parker asked me why someone with my skills was wasting time at a regular hospital when I could be making real money elsewhere. I told him I liked working with my patients, that not everything was about money. He didn't like that answer. He said I'd change my mind eventually, that everyone has their price. Emma leaned forward in her chair. This isn't about drugs, is it? This is about something else entirely. Ramsey closed his notebook. Someone wanted you gone, Emma, and they went to extraordinary lengths to make it happen. The question is, who would benefit from your removal? Emma thought of William Parker, his smooth smile and cold eyes. The way he had questioned her qualifications during their first meeting, despite her years of experience and excellent performance reviews. The same man who had introduced Safeguard Security 3 months ago, the same company that employed Robert Hayes on his days off from the police force. I think, Emma said slowly, we need to look more closely at William Parker and Meridian Healthcare Group. For the first time since her arrest, Emma felt a spark of hope. The pieces were starting to come together. Someone had gone to great lengths to destroy her life, but they had made mistakes, and those mistakes might just be the key to her freedom. Elizabeth Cooper had worked as a court clerk in the Boston Municipal Court for 15 years. In that time, she had seen thousands of cases pass through the system. She knew the rhythm of justice, its patterns and flows. She also knew when something wasn't right. Elizabeth was a quiet woman in her 40s with graying hair. She never bothered to dye, and sharp eyes that missed very little. She lived alone in a small apartment with 2 cats and spent her evenings reading mystery novels. Her job had taught her that real crimes were rarely as neat as fiction, but sometimes they followed patterns just as predictable. When Emma Johnson's case file crossed her desk, Something about it caught Elizabeth's attention. Maybe it was the perfect arrangement of evidence, too tidy to be real. Or maybe it was the fact that she had seen Officer Hayes' name attached to similar cases before. Whatever it was, Elizabeth found herself staying late after work, reviewing the file when no one else was around. The evidence log was meticulously kept, as all police records should be. But as Elizabeth compared the timestamps on the evidence bags to the police report, she noticed discrepancies. The pills allegedly found in Emma's locker were logged into evidence 2 hours before the time Hayes claimed to have discovered them. It was a small detail, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Elizabeth pulled 3 other case files from the records room, all involving Black healthcare workers, all within the past year, all with Hayes as the arresting officer. The pattern became clear. The same inconsistencies appeared in each file, the same perfectly arranged evidence, the same rushed judgments. "This isn't right," Elizabeth muttered to herself. She knew what she had to do, even though it might cost her the job she had held for 15 years. The next morning, Elizabeth waited outside the courthouse for Michael Ramsey. She recognized him from Emma's hearings. Rumpled suit, tired eyes, a man going through the motions without much fire. Elizabeth hoped there was still enough spark in him to care about justice. "Mr. Ramsey," she called out as he approached the courthouse steps. "I need to speak with you about Emma Johnson's case." Ramsey looked surprised, then wary. "And you are?" "Elizabeth Cooper. I'm a clerk with the court." She lowered her voice. "This needs to be private." They found a quiet corner in a nearby coffee shop. Elizabeth placed a folder on the table between them. "The timestamps on these evidence bags don't match the police report," Elizabeth explained, opening the folder to show him her findings. "The pills were logged into evidence before Hayes claims to have found them. And I've seen Officer Hayes testify in 3 other cases against Black healthcare workers in the past year, all with similar evidence patterns." Ramsey's eyes widened as he looked through the papers. "Why are you showing me this?" Elizabeth met his gaze directly. "Because I've watched too many cases like Emma's unfold. The system swallows people whole, especially people of color. I can't sit by anymore." For the first time in years, Ramsey felt a surge of the passion that had driven him to become a lawyer in the first place. "This could cost you your job." "Some things matter more than jobs," Elizabeth replied simply. Over the next week, Elizabeth and Ramsey worked together, digging deeper into the evidence against Emma. Elizabeth used her access to court records to find similar cases. Ramsey filed motions requesting more detailed hospital records. "Look at this," Ramsey said during one of their meetings, spreading papers across Elizabeth's kitchen table. The medication logs were altered using Emma's credentials, but hospital records show she was actively caring for patients in the ICU at those exact times. Elizabeth studied the records. She couldn't be in 2 places at once. Someone else used her login. "But we need to prove it," Ramsey said, frustration creeping into his voice. "We need someone who understands these systems, someone who can show how they were manipulated." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, then spoke hesitantly. "We need someone with technical expertise. I know someone." "Who?" Ramsey asked. "Marcus Wright. He's a digital forensics expert. He consults with law firms now, but he used to work for a major tech company before." Elizabeth paused. "Before what?" "Before he was wrongfully convicted of computer fraud. He spent 2 years in prison before new evidence exonerated him." Elizabeth looked Ramsey in the eye. "He understands what Emma is going through, and he's the best at what he does." Marcus Wright agreed to meet them the next day. He was younger than Ramsey had expected, maybe in his early 30s, with a quiet intensity about him. They met in a small office Marcus rented in a building filled with other tech startups. "Elizabeth explained your situation," Marcus said, gesturing for them to sit. "I'll help if I can." Ramsey laid out the evidence they had gathered so far. "We believe someone framed Emma Johnson by altering medication logs and editing security footage. Can you help us prove it?" Marcus studied the files carefully. His fingers moved quickly over his keyboard as he examined the digital files they had obtained through court orders. After nearly an hour of silent work, he looked up. "This footage has been edited," he said, pointing to barely perceptible jumps in the security video. "See this? It's what we call a splice artifact. Someone cut out segments of time to make it look like Emma was taking medications when she wasn't." Ramsey leaned forward to look at the screen. "Can you prove that in court?" "Absolutely," Marcus nodded. "And these login records have been backdated. The timestamp metadata doesn't match the system logs. This isn't amateur work. Whoever did this knows what they're doing, but they got sloppy in a few places." Hope surged through Ramsey. "So we can prove Emma's innocence." "We can prove the evidence against her was manipulated," Marcus corrected. "But we still don't know who did it or why." Elizabeth had been quiet, thinking. "We need to connect Hayes to Parker and safeguard security. And we need to figure out how Meridian Healthcare fits into all this." Marcus turned back to his computer. "Let me see what I can find about Safeguard's contracts and Meridian's operations. Companies leave digital footprints, and I'm good at following trails." Over the next several days, the three unlikely allies worked tirelessly. Marcus hacked into Safeguard's personnel records, finding proof that Hayes worked for them while also serving as a police officer, a conflict of interest he had never disclosed. Elizabeth discovered court records showing Meridian Healthcare had faced multiple lawsuits for inadequate care in their prison facilities, settling out of court each time. "We're getting closer," Ramsey told Emma during his next visit to the jail. "We have evidence the security footage was edited, and that someone else used your login credentials." Emma's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank you. Thank you for believing me." "Don't thank me," Ramsey said honestly. "Thank Elizabeth Cooper. She's the one who saw the pattern and had the courage to speak up." "And Marcus Wright," Elizabeth added. "Without his expertise, we'd still be guessing." Emma wiped her eyes. "I want to meet them someday, to thank them myself." Ramsey smiled. "You will, when you're free." For the first time since her arrest, Emma allowed herself to truly believe that day might come. With these unexpected allies fighting for her, the truth was finally beginning to emerge from the shadows where her enemies had tried to bury it. Marcus Wright worked late into the night, following digital breadcrumbs through a maze of corporate records, emails, and financial transactions. The glow of his computer screen illuminated his tired face as he connected dots that painted a disturbing picture. By morning, he had compiled enough evidence to call an emergency meeting with Elizabeth and Ramsey. "You need to see this," Marcus said, spreading printouts across the table in Ramsey's small office. "William Parker isn't just a hospital administrator. Before Boston Memorial, he was a senior executive at Meridian Healthcare Group." Elizabeth picked up one of the documents. "The company that runs prison healthcare facilities." "Exactly," Marcus nodded. "And last year, Meridian acquired a $50 million contract to provide medical services at the county jail and 3 other correctional facilities in the state." Ramsey frowned. "What does this have to do with Emma?" Marcus pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. "These are staff records from Meridian's prison facilities. They're desperately understaffed. The working conditions are terrible, and the pay is about 40% lower than at regular hospitals. No one wants to work there, especially not qualified nurses with clean records." Elizabeth's eyes widened as she began to understand. So they needed medical professionals who had no other options. And they created those professionals, Ramsey said slowly, the pieces falling into place, by framing them for crimes that would destroy their careers. Marcus nodded grimly. "I found emails between Parker and the CEO of Meridian discussing their recruitment strategy. They never spell it out directly, but the language is clear if you know what to look for. They talk about creating opportunities and leveraging legal challenges to build their workforce." Elizabeth pulled another folder from her bag. "I found 8 cases in the past year, all healthcare workers charged with stealing medications. All but one were people of color. All were convicted or took plea deals." "Where are they now?" Ramsey asked. Marcus turned his laptop to show them. 6 of them are currently employed at Meridian facilities. After serving short sentences, they couldn't find work anywhere else. Meridian offered them jobs despite their criminal records. The room fell silent as they absorbed the enormity of what they had discovered. This wasn't just about Emma. It was a systematic conspiracy targeting vulnerable healthcare workers, destroying careers and lives for corporate profit. "We need to follow the money," Elizabeth said finally. If Wilson and Hayes were involved, they were being paid. Marcus pulled up more documents. "I traced unusual deposits to offshore accounts linked to both Detective Wilson and Officer Hayes. The money came through a series of shell companies, but I followed it back to Safeguard Security, which is a subsidiary of Meridian Healthcare Group," Ramsey finished, his voice tight with anger. "They paid the police to frame innocent people." Elizabeth shook her head in disbelief. "And District Attorney Bennett, is he involved too?" Marcus hesitated. "I can't prove it yet, but there are some concerning connections. Bennett's campaign received substantial donations from Meridian executives, and his brother-in-law sits on Meridian's board of directors. This explains why Bennett pushed so hard for a quick plea deal," Ramsey said, thinking back to the unusual pressure he faced from the DA's office. 5 years if she pleaded guilty immediately, or risk 20 if she went to trial. They didn't want anyone looking too closely at the evidence. The breakthrough moment came when William Parker himself took the stand. At first, he appeared calm and professional in his expensive suit, denying any connection between Emma's arrest and Meridian's prison healthcare staffing needs. Ramsey approached his cross-examination methodically, leading Parker through a series of seemingly innocent questions about his career, his role at Boston Memorial, and his previous position at Meridian. Slowly, he built toward the heart of the conspiracy. "Mr. Parker, did you have concerns about Emma Johnson's qualifications when you became administrator?" Ramsey asked. "No more than any other staff member," Parker replied smoothly. "Yet you questioned her 3 times in staff meetings about her decisions, despite her excellent record. Why is that?" "I expect excellence from all my staff." Ramsey presented emails showing Parker had questioned only minority staff members in this way. "Is it coincidence that all these healthcare workers happen to be people of color?" Parker's composure began to crack. "I don't see race. I see qualifications." "Then why did you write in this email to Meridian CEO that you had identified several candidates for a special program, and that they were primarily from disadvantaged backgrounds?" As Ramsey pressed harder, showing more emails and financial records, Parker's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. His answers grew shorter, his tone more defensive. "These prison facilities need qualified staff," Parker snapped. "We're providing jobs to people who otherwise wouldn't have them after their convictions." "Convictions that you helped orchestrate," Ramsey said quietly. "Objection," Bennett shouted. "Withdrawn," Ramsey said, but the damage was done. "Mr. Parker, why would a convicted nurse take a job paying less than half her previous salary?" "These people should be grateful for the second chance," Parker snapped, his face flushing with anger. "Their kind doesn't deserve those prestigious positions anyway." The courtroom erupted. The jury gasped at the naked prejudice in Parker's words. Several jurors exchanged glances of shock and disgust. "Order." Judge Wilson banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order in the court." In the sudden silence that followed, Parker seemed to realize what he had said. His face paled as he looked at the jury, seeing the impact of his words in their expressions. Ramsey stood quietly for a moment, letting Parker's statement hang in the air. "No further questions, Your Honor." As Parker stepped down from the witness stand, his eyes met Emma's across the courtroom. For the first time since her arrest, Emma sat straight-backed and confident. She had lost weight, yes. She had lost months of her life. But in that moment, with the truth finally exposed, Emma Johnson found that she hadn't lost everything after all. The path to justice was finally clear. The jury filed back into the courtroom after deliberating for just 1 hour and 45 minutes. Emma sat at the defense table, her hands clasped tightly together, trying to control their trembling. Ramsey placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder as they waited for the verdict that would determine her future. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Wilson asked. The jury forewoman, a middle-aged teacher named Margaret Collins, stood. "We have, Your Honor." The courtroom fell silent. Emma could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "On the charge of theft of controlled substances, how do you find?" "We find the defendant, Emma Johnson, not guilty." A small gasp escaped Emma's lips. "On the charge of intent to distribute controlled substances, how do you find?" "Not guilty, Your Honor." Tears began to stream down Emma's face as each remaining charge was met with the same response: "Not guilty." The nightmare was ending. Freedom was within reach. Behind her, Emma could hear Patricia sobbing quietly in relief. The judge thanked the jury for their service and officially dismissed the case against Emma Johnson. "You are free to go, Ms. Johnson," Judge Wilson said, her eyes showing a hint of compassion for what Emma had endured. The following morning, Boston woke to breaking news. Federal agents had arrested William Parker, Detective Thomas Wilson, Officer Robert Hayes, and 4 executives from Meridian Healthcare Group. The charges included conspiracy, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and civil rights violations. The FBI had been quietly building their own case, working with information provided by Ramsey, Elizabeth, and Marcus. By afternoon, District Attorney James Bennett called a press conference to announce his resignation. Evidence had emerged showing he had known about the scheme and helped cover it up in exchange for campaign donations and the promise of a lucrative position with Meridian after his time as DA. Emma's first days of freedom were a blur of tearful reunions, long hugs with her children, and finally sleeping in her own bed. The media clamored for interviews, but she turned them all down, needing time to heal and reconnect with her family. Patricia had kept Emma's apartment, believing her sister would come home eventually. "I never doubted you," she told Emma as they sat together drinking tea late one night. "Not for a single minute." Weeks passed. The hospital board contacted Emma, offering not just reinstatement to her position, but a formal apology and a substantial financial settlement for the damage to her reputation and career. After careful consideration and consultation with a new attorney, Emma accepted. While some urged her to use the money to move away and start fresh, Emma had other plans. She used part of the settlement to create the Second Chance Healthcare Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting minorities in healthcare and providing legal defense for medical professionals facing suspicious accusations. 6 months after her acquittal, on a bright summer morning, Emma stood on the courthouse steps for a press conference. Beside her stood 7 other healthcare professionals whose convictions had been overturned after review in light of the conspiracy. Their stories were remarkably similar to Emma's. Talented minority healthcare workers framed for crimes they didn't commit, their careers destroyed to feed a corrupt system. Behind them stood their champions, Michael Ramsey, no longer rumpled and tired but standing tall in a new suit; Elizabeth Cooper, who had risked her career to expose the truth; and Marcus Wright, whose technical expertise had unraveled the digital evidence of the conspiracy. "Today marks a new beginning," Emma said into the microphones arranged before her. "Not just for me and my colleagues standing here, but for justice in our healthcare system." Reporters called out questions about the case, about the ongoing federal investigation that had now expanded to 3 other states where Meridian operated healthcare facilities. "We've discovered at least 32 cases across the country," Ramsey explained. "Healthcare professionals targeted and framed, then exploited when their options ran out. The conspiracy was larger than any of us initially imagined." Emma stepped forward again. "Our foundation has already helped overturn 5 wrongful convictions. But our work is just beginning. We're advocating for stronger oversight of prison healthcare systems and protections for whistleblowers who expose corruption." A reporter asked how it felt to have her name cleared after such a public accusation. "The relief is indescribable," Emma admitted. But this isn't just about justice for me. This is about exposing a system that saw Black excellence as a threat rather than an asset. This is about ensuring that power cannot be abused to destroy lives simply because of the color of someone's skin. The hospital had transformed as well. Boston Memorial had implemented new security protocols to prevent credential theft, appointed a diverse ethics board, and created scholarships for minority nursing students. Dr. James Miller, who had stood up for Emma during her arrest, was now the hospital's administrator. As cameras flashed, Emma felt Lily and Daniel grip her hands tightly. They had suffered too. Taunts at school, whispers from neighbors, the pain of visiting their mother in jail. But they had emerged stronger, more aware of injustice and the importance of fighting it. "Mom," Lily whispered, her voice full of pride, "you didn't just clear your name. You changed the system." Emma looked at her daughter, then at her son, whose eyes shone with admiration. She glanced back at the diverse group of allies who had fought beside her. Ramsey with his rediscovered passion for justice, Elizabeth with her quiet courage, Marcus with his brilliant mind, Patricia with her unwavering loyalty, and the other healthcare workers who had suffered as she had. "No," Emma said with quiet conviction, turning back to the microphones. "We changed it together, and we're just getting started."